You're in a conversation and something feels off. They didn't yell. They didn't accuse you of anything. They just said one sentence, calmly, and somehow you walked away apologizing for something you didn't do. You replay it in your head, looking for the part where you were wrong. You can't find it. That's because it isn't there. But the real answer is far stranger than a simple misunderstanding. The way someone talks to you can reveal a personality structure built, deliberately or not, to survive on your doubt. Most people think narcissism looks like arrogance, loud confidence. A person standing in a room demanding to be the center of it. That version exists, but it's the easy one to spot. The harder version doesn't raise its voice. It doesn't need to. It speaks softly, agrees with you just enough to seem reasonable, and then redirects the entire conversation back to itself without you noticing the turn. Psychologist Jean Twenge has spent decades studying how narcissistic traits surface not as obvious self-obsession, but as patterns woven so tightly into everyday language that most people mistake them for personality quirks. Have you ever noticed how some people can make an apology sound like an accusation? Here's where it gets stranger. Narcissistic language isn't random. It follows a structure, almost like a script the person doesn't even know they're running. Listen for the conditional apology. "I'm sorry you feel that way." Notice what that sentence actually does. It sounds like an apology. It functions as a denial. Your feelings become the problem, not their behavior. Harvard psychologist Craig Malkin describes this defense as so automatic that the person saying it often believes they really did apologize. They're not lying to you. They're lying to themselves first, and you're just standing close enough to hear it land. Then there's the comparison trap. "Other people would be grateful for what I do for you." This sentence isn't about gratitude. It's about control dressed up as generosity. It quietly invents a debt you never agreed to owe. You start keeping score in your own head, trying to prove you're not ungrateful, and somewhere in that effort, you stop noticing that the original behavior was never actually examined. Why does the debt feel so real, even when no one ever wrote down the terms? But the phrase that should concern you most is the one that sounds the kindest. "I just want what's best for you." On the surface, it reads as love. Underneath, it can function as a leash. Researcher W. Keith Campbell, who has spent his career studying narcissistic personality traits, found that high narcissism individuals often frame control as care, because care is harder to argue with than control. If someone tells you what to wear, you push back. If someone tells you they're only worried about you, pushing back makes you look ungrateful, even paranoid. The sentence doesn't just protect them, it disarms you before you've decided to defend yourself. Why does this work so well on people who are otherwise sharp, skeptical, even guarded in every other part of their life? Because your brain is wired to assume good intent. When someone uses warm language, your nervous system relaxes even when the content underneath is cold. That's not a flaw in you. That's empathy doing exactly what it evolved to do. The problem is that empathy has no built-in lie detector. It trusts tone over substance. And language like this is shaped, consciously or not, to exploit exactly that gap between how something sounds and what it actually does. So what happens to you after months or years of conversations built this way? You start narrating your own feelings before anyone else can. You preemptively explain why you're upset, as if bracing for the conditional apology before it even arrives. You become hyper-aware of your own tone, while theirs goes unquestioned, almost invisible, like background noise you've stopped hearing. This isn't weakness, it's adaptation. Your brain learned through repetition that calm logic gets met with redirection, so it started building defenses before the conversation even begins. The exhausting part was never the conflict itself, it was the constant translation work, decoding what someone actually meant underneath what they chose to say. There's a quieter cost too, one that rarely gets named. Over time, you stop trusting your first read of a situation. The moment something feels wrong, a second voice steps in, gentler than the first, asking if you're overreacting. That second voice didn't exist before. It was built, conversation by conversation, every time your discomfort got reframed as the actual problem. Psychologists call this a slow erosion of self-trust, and it rarely announces itself. It just shows up one day as hesitation, where confidence used to live. Think about the last time you left a conversation feeling smaller than when you walked in, even though nothing was technically said that you could point to as wrong. Was there a sentence right before that feeling started? A phrase that sounded reasonable in the moment but didn't sit right an hour later? That delay is the signal. Manipulative language is rarely caught in real time. It's caught in retrospect, when your nervous system finally has the space to process what your conscious mind was too busy being polite to notice. It isn't always your boss or a partner or a parent. Sometimes it's a friend who frames every favor as evidence of how much they care, until you feel obligated rather than appreciated. Sometimes it's a colleague who softens every piece of feedback with warmth, while the substance underneath quietly shifts blame onto you. The setting changes. The structure doesn't. Once you know what to listen for, you start hearing it in places you never expected, and that recognition alone can feel disorienting, like noticing a sound that's apparently always been there. You don't need a clinical diagnosis to protect yourself. You don't need to prove, with certainty, that someone meets every criterion in a manual before you are allowed to trust the discomfort certain phrases leave behind. Language gives you information long before a label would. The next time someone tells you they're sorry you feel that way, notice what the sentence asks of you, and notice everything it quietly excuses them from. The words people use aren't just communication, they're a map of how they understand power. And once you learn to read that map, you stop mistaking control for love, and you start trusting the version of the conversation you actually felt. Subscribe to The Silent Diplomat, and never be the last person in the room to understand what just happened.